Welcome back. The storm knocked us off the air. Hope we're back on at least for now. Granted, everything is nasty around, but let's at least try to get the rest of the hour in that we were going to do with Art Bell.
Suffered symptoms that seemed to indicate that they were potentially epileptics, from Joan of Arc to the Apostle Paul to Muhammad. In historical writings, there seems to be evidence that they suffered from epilepsy. Dostoevsky, for instance, who was an epileptic, he wrote in his book The Idiot, and I quote, I have really touched God. He came into me. You healthy people cannot imagine the happiness we epileptics feel seconds before we suffer from one of our attacks. Again, all suggesting that this is a brain state, not like God literally entering these people, but that their brains, which albeit a little bit broken, somehow in that breakage, it's prompting, it's inducing a religious experience, but it's coming from a dysfunction.
I also believe, and I hate to help you here, but it is true that scientists have been able to electrically stimulate brains in certain areas and produce religious/spiritual experiences.
Yes,
even near death.
Yes, well, that's a different phenomenon. What you're talking about is the transcranial magnetic stimulator, which electromagnetically stimulates specific points in the brain, and if you pointed at, like, the temporal lobe, for instance, or some of these other parts, it can induce a religious experience, which eventually I'm going to get to with that ethnobotany, the last group I'll go to, which is where people take certain drugs or plants to do the same thing, again, suggesting it's all chemical in nature. But back to the neurophysiological, the same person who was going around with this transcranial magnetic stimulator was also interviewing people, and in his interviews with high school students, he found that 1 out of 5 of them who reportedly, said that they were very religious, had also reported that they suffered some type of traumatic brain injury during their lives. This coincides with the work of a Dr. Arnold Sadlin, the former chief of neuropsychiatry at University of Pennsylvania, who was doing research on something called organic psycho syndrome, basically people who suffer from traumatic brain injuries, and it alters their behaviors or their perceptions. He found that there were people, and he was one of the first people who wrote to me after hearing me on your show, saying, I've been doing this research for years, and you made it make sense, because I could never understand why families of people were saying, he suffered a head injury, and suddenly he's super religious, or he was super religious, and now he doesn't go to church or couldn't care less.
Right.
That people can suffer from religious organic psycho syndromes, or if you're banged in the head, it can suddenly turn you into a hyper-religious person or a non-religious person, depending on where you started from. Again, all suggesting that these are just based on the mechanics of the brain as opposed to some ethereal reality beyond us. That it's all an extension, a manifestation of what's going on inside of our heads. So more or less, and I could keep going, but that's generally the work that's been done to suggest from a neurophysiological standpoint that again, God is in your head and not outside of it.
Have you done any research at all into why it is that people from New York and specifically Brooklyn irritate the hell out of people in the rest of the country?
It's an ongoing investigation. I'll let you know when we get results.
It really is true. I mean, on top of everything else, I remember on the old shows we had, I would get these emails afterwards raging, and then at the bottom they'd always put, besides, I can't stand his New York accent.
Yeah, well, sorry about that, people. Deal with it.
Yeah. Okay, now...
Okay, shall I
you separate, right? Religion and spiritualism.
Well, basically, I write that there are two distinct instincts going on here. Two separate regions in the brain that are doing two separate things. So I basically break it into the spiritual instinct and the religious instinct. So spirituality and religiosity are two separate things. So yeah.
Separate part of the brain or same?
Separate parts of the brain. So, for instance, most of religiosity, people who really talk about their religion or God, like these temporal lobe epileptics, it seems to be coming from the temporal lobe, Whereas the spiritual experience, which is a different thing, it's that sense of calm, of oneness with the universe, God consciousness, etc. That's based in a combination of like the amygdala, the parietal lobe. It's a different experience. So basically there's two things coinciding at work here. You've got the capacity for us to have these experiences where our normal ego boundaries are reduced and we feel one with the world, one with the universe, maybe one with God. So through these experiences, we're left feeling that we're connected to something higher. So based on these feelings that prompt beliefs, we then, through the religious instinct, which is more responsible for creating political institutions, for creating laws and rituals and customs, for mythologies, for basically solidifying those spiritual experiences we have, which are more sensory in nature, and consolidating them into sort of a mythical paradigm, which has politics and customs and rituals and rules we have to abide by, which give us a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of purpose. So that's why you can have people who might report that they're very religious, they're very involved in going to church and the rituals, but they wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as spiritual. And you have other people who say, I'm highly spiritual, but I'm not at all religious.
And with that, unfortunately, with the weather being inclement outside and just screwing around with the internet connection like we are, sadly going to have to bring tonight's part 3 to an early close. Please make sure you do like, share, and subscribe. Be kind to one another. And release the Krakens, as we march normally for a full hour every night and overnight here from day 1. See you in the morning, and I mean in the afternoon. Till then, have a great night.